Is it on? Can folks hear us? Perfect. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jordan, for introduction, and thank you everyone for joining us here. Hope you had a good lunch, and I think now it's up to us to make sure everyone doesn't sleep in food coma. So we'll try to keep it a little bit lightweight, entertaining. I'll start with some introductions, and we have a timer running here, so we'll wrap it up in 30 minutes. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of time for Q&A on stage, but we'll be available in mezzanine or down at the ground floor if you have any questions for us. So I'll start with my introduction. Hi, everyone. My name is Ankit. I'm the founder of a company called Aviator. We are a startup who helps large engineering teams improve their developer experience, typically helping with challenges around build failures, flaky test, code ownership, reviews, essentially helping teams be able to ship code faster. And we have some amazing lineup here with my panelists. We have Lauren here from Reddit. Lauren leads the Android engineering developer experience. We have Cherif from Airbnb. He's leading the iOS side of developer experience. And we have Adam here, who is at Amplitude, leading the entire developer experience team. So with that, I would love to at least start a little bit with overview of developer experience. Like, what does developer experience even mean? So I'm going to actually pass it on to maybe Lauren. Why don't you start? I think more important than developer experience, so we had just a panel about developer productivity as well. So why don't we at least try to figure out, is there a difference between developer experience and developer productivity?
Sure. Okay, test. Okay. So there is a difference. I like to think about this as from a product perspective. I think of developer productivity as an efficiency set of conditions, and you're really looking for business value and to get the most out of your engineering teams. But you're looking to do that usually by looking at units produced and velocity and certain things like that. And you can get really into the metrics and not necessarily looking at the outcomes that you're trying to go after. And I think of developer experience, well, I'm definitely more of a proponent of developer experience. And that I see as user-focused. And so you're thinking about your user is your engineer or your engineering team, and you're taking a more holistic approach to all the things that help them produce the best possible outcomes or features or products. And so to me, that's less about units produced and more about looking at engineering as a creative process and an efficient creative process. So you're often solving the same challenges, but you're doing them on, for your users, just like you would a feature.
Cherif?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely agree with Lauren. One thing I would add is maybe take an example, the difference between developer experience for me, when you look at, for example, some of the metrics that you'll be tracking, right? I think you'll be less focused on some of your input metrics in terms of how many PRs your developers are putting out. But then look at more holistically, right? Some of the outcome metrics. How effective is your organization in kind of moving fast and moving reliably, right? Because if you just focus on that unit of production, as Lauren mentioned, you're missing a lot of nuances. So yeah, again, well said, a holistic developer experience. And especially on the platform team, you consider what you ship as a product. And then when you look at it from that perspective, there's a lot more angles to it.
Adam, anything?
Yeah, I think one of the really key things of how I think about it is actually I just want to help my developers build focus and then use focus to do good work, because that actually tends to be just the core of the happiness. I definitely have the productive view, how are we getting change flowed through the system, how effective, how fast, how reliable are we? That's, to me, is the productivity side. But just that, hey, am I enjoying coming to work today? Is it nice? Am I getting focused? Am I just doing the things I want to do? And that's sort of that split of activity for me in my head. That's the difference.
Okay. Yes.
One more thing is just you want your engineers to come to work and enjoy working, but you also don't want them fighting with the tools or with the architecture and those types of things. So I think you're really looking for optimizing for that, assuming that if you can navigate your own architecture and setup, then you will build the right things.
Right. I mean, at the end of the day, it's also like developer satisfaction or developer happiness, right?
Yeah, if you've ever written a slide that says how to do X in 12 easy steps, you're not doing it right. That's wrong. And that's true. I've seen those slides. Like, never written them, but I've seen them. Like, they exist.
Awesome. So I'm going to pass this one to you, Adam, because this is also an interesting question for your team. What's a perfect ratio of engineers to developer experience team? So for background, Adam also used to work at Pinterest, and I would love for you to like even compare Pinterest and here at Amplitude.
Yeah, so I think this is one of those questions where you can immediately get bogged down in the details and actually completely miss the point. Because I think DevX is actually a function that should spread through the organization. You should not look at it as like, oh, we've got those 5 people to our 150 people looking after this. There is a core of a tooling to get to be sure, but you've got to think about this in terms of like time commitment through the whole org. People is the wrong ratio. Resource allocation across all work is the right one to think about. And that's a tough one. It depends a little bit where you're at, but like 10 to 15% tends to be a pretty good marker across teams, averaged out over a whole org. Depends on life cycle, bunch of other stuff, but that's how I benchmark it.
How is it, like, sorry, I'm just going to dig a little bit. How was it compared to Pinterest and Amplitude? So like if there is a difference in the way the team was set up or like culturally the developer experience?
Yeah, I mean, right now, he's asking this to me because I'm right now a team of 1, which is like kind of awesome and kind of terrible at the same time. I think overall those ratios, I think generally are going down in terms of teams, like meaning we're doing smaller teams against larger orgs as we try to figure out like this larger, no, just how are we spreading this function through the whole thing. I think there is a little bit more of the whole pressure of we're all trying to do more with less. DevX is exactly as susceptible to that pressure as everyone else. So
Awesome. Thank you. Cherif?
Yeah, actually, I have come to form an opinion about that ratio, and I think ultimately it depends on where you are as a company, right? Like, usually, like the way I like to frame this is there's 3 buckets of these. Either you are starting, so kind of like still kind of like iterating, very small. On the other hand, you have bigger companies, right? Like think of your Facebook, your Googles, and those have tremendously different challenges in terms of scale. And then there's the middle, where you are, you have kind of achieved some amount of success, and then you're growing. Maybe you're in your hyper growth phase. If you're in that phase, I find that 5% of the DevX engineers to the overall dev population is a good balance. That's where we are at Airbnb right now, a little bit more than that, and it ebbs and flows, of course. But I think at that ratio, you usually can justify like spending that amount of resources for hopefully moving faster and reliably.
Thank you. You had some interesting takes on it, Lauren.
Yes. I don't have an opinion on a certain number. I could tell you some number and make a case for it. I think it matters a lot with your current business. Like, are you trying to do things on-prem, in-house? Are you willing to invest in that for reasons or you need to? Or are you trying to outsource some of those things? But I do know what it feels like when it's under-resourced. And I think that is something that everyone can usually figure out pretty easily. It's like, are you all volunteers and you don't have a team yet? Is it taking up more and more of your time and you're getting a lot of complaints about the developer experience? Then it's probably too late and you really needed to act before that. If you've gone through a hyper growth period where you have a ton more engineers than you expected to have and you're scaling and that's not working, probably you should think about that as part of your scaling strategy. And my favorite one is if your hackathon weeks are being like completely consumed with people desperate to do DevX projects because they're not getting onto roadmaps. Those are all really good indicators that you don't have a right balance. So sure, I think it's somewhere in between like 5 to 15%, but it could be very different if you are, say, an IoT company that really needs a lot of special stuff or not. But yeah, I think Reddit specifically has gone through a lot of like growth in this area, and they underinvested in platform And it was a lot of people that weren't necessarily like trained in platform work up front, and they had learned on the job. And then they found they had a whole bunch of issues that they needed to like really retool, reskill, and like scale up their team to resolve. So ideally, before they get too big and out of control, you have like made a plan for having a proper team.
Awesome. So Lauren and Cherif, you both run mobile DevX teams internally, right? Like when I'm saying DevX, it's like developer experience. So, and a lot of people here probably are like in teams where either there isn't really a formal developer experience or developer productivity team. So one is like, how should one think about developer experience or productivity team internally if they're just starting up? And also like, how do you think about like having sort of like this central DX team across your entire engineering org versus sort of like more platform or technology specific? Cherif, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So I think that's a two-part question. The mobile DevX aspect, so let me start there. If you have a team and maybe you are focused on mobile, you have some product there, I find that somewhat the challenges are the same, right? You are trying to get your engineers to move quickly and get code done, and as we discussed, be happy doing it. Some of the specific challenges that I've seen come up are kind of due to the nature of these platform teams. I think we live in this duopoly of iOS and Android, and I think one of those challenges, as a consumer of that, you kind of have to pay over those two companies. Like you still want your developer, your eng leaders, your teams to think about the product and not the platform. So as a platform team focused on the experience, you want to give them like an abstraction across that. And that's not as simple as you think, because Apple and Google have different priorities. So I think that's one. To a duopoly, and keeping your team maybe like abstracted away from that. The other aspect for me is, again, in that world where you have platform players, you are kind of like living on their terms, right? Like, for example, on iOS, you have Apple, which has very specific kind of set of opinions about how to run things. So I think you are the receiving of, as a team, as a company that can focus on your own vertical, you are the receiving end of that. And it's challenging, especially at a certain scale where you will really like to push the envelope. You almost have to dive down to the lowest level of the tech stack. Anyway, I think keeping those two things in mind, being cognizant of that, understanding it, and obviously like making the right trade-offs for the kind of business that you have would make sense. So that would be my answer.
Lauren?
So when I think about the difference between mobile and the rest of the company like Reddit, there are a few things that come up. One is we're often using different tools than the rest of the business. So our CI pipelines are different. We also have a lot of differences from our backend teams in terms of we don't have the opportunity to have real continuous deployments. So we are generally packaging up a set of PRs on a cadence, uploading them to the stores, and releasing them through the stores. And so we have heavy reliance on things like feature flags and experiments in order to kind of like gate things and to avoid hotfixes and stuff like that. So I think one of the ways this shows up in things like incidents is, oh, can you please just revert that one thing? And we're like, no. We can fix forward, or we can turn something off if it happens to be well gated, but there are things you can't gate. So I think that's a very different mindset shift, and you need specialist solutions for those things. I like to put to pretend I'm in the feature team's shoes, and I think that feature teams often have like web and mobile engineers on them while they're developing a feature across all these different clients. So one of the things I'm looking for is just how do we make that easy, where you don't have like a bespoke answer for every single client that's different. So anywhere we can actually like harmonize how it works on Android or iOS, or give some sort of like level of abstraction in terms of our processes or something that makes it agnostic, I'm looking to do that. So there are examples where we use the same term across all clients, but they mean something different under the hood. But that makes it easier for most people to at least have a shared language about those things. Same thing with process. So for example, if you want to late merge something for a release, ideally that works the same no matter which platform you're talking about. And those things are difficult to do. Yeah.
Okay. Adam, like you're a single person DX team, I'm going to point it again. Do you have any advice for people here who are just considering thinking about setting up the DX team internally? Because like in some ways, Amplitude, you did that for them.
Yeah, I think some of what was being talked about before about it's actually more about what are the signals in your business that make it a thing that you should like start to think about. You know, what you should be looking for. I think listening to whether or not, I mean, devs will always find things to complain about. Like that's just like true. Like even when you are happy and things are nice, like you're still going to grumble about something. You know, I think, but like just listening for those things that you're hearing repeatedly are like the signals to think about when you need to start like pushing it up. There's the obvious things that are like, okay, we're not shipping as quickly as we used to, or suddenly we've had an uptick in incidents, or like, you know, those are sort of like obvious. But there's some like less obvious ones, you know, like if you're, as you know, is common now, like sort of like gradually building an engineering org in a monorepo, and you hear people go, yeah, I would upgrade TensorFlow, but that's going to take me 2 months, and I've got all this other stuff to do. That's one of your signals right there, right? Like if people don't want to upgrade dependencies ever, that's what, you know, like, so there's a bunch of these like little things that wouldn't come across as, hey, we should have someone looking after these tooling, but they become these consistent complaints, and if they get high enough in volume, start spending.
Awesome. Okay, so Adam, your favorite topic again, I'm going to just point it again to you, monorepos.
Yep.
Share your opinion, like monorepos, polyrepos, what's your take?
Yeah, well, so I think we'll actually start here. A fun thing about monorepos is we have, as an industry, no formal definition of what they are. Which actually is like just a fun thing. But I think they can be fine, but just recognize that you must invest in them. There are no free lunches with these things, and I know like we've got a lot of like success stories at scale of companies who've done this well, but that came from years and years of consistent investment to get that tooling and experience great. You don't get that. And genuinely, like medium-sized businesses, there are nothing but conversations about my build times have gotten suck, my tests have gotten flaky. Here's the one, developers saying consistently, I've got my PR, it's up. This other test failed, it has nothing to do with mine. What am I supposed to do now? If they're saying that repeatedly, like you just need to like invest in the tooling. If I had my preference, I would do micro repos. I haven't seen a business doing that in a number of years now. So, you know, I'm just living in a world that I'd kind of rather not, but hey, that's just where I find myself.
I mean, we also spoke with LinkedIn recently. They actually talked about they're probably one of the largest companies using a multi-repo, but you have like at least some inspiration there.
Yeah.
All right, Cherif, anything on monorepos? You folks have a monorepo at Airbnb, right?
Yeah, we do. Actually, we have several monorepos, which is kind of a misnomer because really not a monorepo. But yeah, we do use monorepos. I guess my take on this is, you know, I kind of hate this answer, but honestly, this is applicable here. It's really about your size, right? And the analogy that I like to think of is, how do you, when you are kind of like driving on the highway, you could have everyone doing whatever they want, right? And I think if you're a startup starting up and you're just trying to get that product market fit, that's the right trade-off, right? Like have everyone move as fast as possible. And then comes a certain time where, you know, the cost of everyone going different ways is just too big. And that's why you need people to be, you know, on what we call at Airbnb, the path path, which is kind of like, it's the 90-10 solution where you know that it works for most use cases, and you want to be opinionated about that. I think when you are at that stage, a monorepo is a good idea, because then you have a forcing function to ensure that consistency. So again, it depends on your size. Once you get big enough, I'm of the opinion that, you know, it's a good idea.
So we are monorepos on our mobile platforms and more microservices and micro repos, or however you want to call it, elsewhere. I think we do have a few exceptions to that. If you are an experimentation idea, we're happy with you experimenting elsewhere before we decide that that's all coming in. And our design system is built for cross-platform use, and so it's off in its own repo and then versioned and then brought in. I think when we invested in having a proper platform team, it was really helpful to have a monorepo because we could make a lot of assumptions about the shape we wanted to see in it, and ideally we're providing a ton of value to the people who show up there. So we can give you all sorts of tools that work if you follow certain guidelines, or if you follow certain like agreed upon shapes and dependency structures and stuff like that. And so we had a lot of work to do to build a testable repo. And so we really wanted everyone in the same place so we could start, for lack of a better word, prescribing the way we would like to see things in order to get a vision for everybody to be getting the bare minimum value out of having all those new ideas. Whether or not that lives long term, I don't know. But for now, it's really good for being able to say, this is how it works here in this space, and this is the shape it's expected to be, and we can make a lot of roadmap and assumptions on that. Anyone outside is kind of like the Wild West, and they may have integration pain, and they also don't get all the value of the stuff that we're doing in there.
So in a way, you're saying is like there is benefits of standardization that Monorepo brings in, but like anyone who's deciding to go in that direction has to be very intentional because it's going to be a long road and like a lot of tooling to be built. Cool. Okay, I do want to dig in a little bit more into measuring productivity, but before that, I would love to, it's kind of like related. How do you talk to leadership about productivity and like developer experience? Like, because this is an investment on engineering time. So what does it take to convince the leadership? Is it like a lot of these initiatives are coming top down, bottoms up? Like it's a little bit like all over the place, but I would love to take your, like all of your perspectives, given that you folks are also working in companies where many companies look up to in terms of like developer experience. So Lauren, maybe you can start a little bit with thinking about like, how do you work with leadership to define developer experience team, developer experience org, and sort of like prove out the impact?
So do you want measurement answers or?
No, it's more about like talking to the leadership, like kind of like, how does leadership, like is leadership themselves bringing in these initiatives? How are you actually like working with them? I mean, like measurements is part of it, right? So maybe you can talk a little bit about measurement itself too.
I think most of our developer experience in sort of a generative way comes from engineers trying to help other engineers.
Right, so it's bottoms up a little bit.
Yeah, I think that most of the top-down asks initially start more around productivity and like what's going on. We're fully remote, so people want to know what the heck is going on and why are these teams delivering really well and these teams are not. Everyone says builds are slow, like is that the real reason? You ask engineers and they give you a completely different set of reasons. And so I think like high fidelity observability across what is really going on in your engineering org is kind of the big ask from above. But in terms of how we go about measuring those things, I think I really like things like cycle time when you define that as from the moment you want something to happen to when you can get it in users' hands. You break that down and there's like a billion different things going on and you can kind of focus on the ones that are most important in there. But for some, it's about how fast can you get it to that person, and for some, it's about how fast can you make that delightful, and is it a like ridiculous slog along the way? I think in terms of how we measure those things, I really want the measurements that we make to be generative. I want them to be trusted, and that usually means some level of abstraction, some qualitative and quantitative information, surveys, as well as hard numbers like build times.
Cherif?
Yeah, so I guess I'll start with the part about how you measure productivity. And honestly, it's not my favorite thing because I haven't really seen a really good way to do that. I think as an industry, we are still kind of learning to assess this space. At Airbnb, what I can share about how we do it at Airbnb, we use the Dora framework. And you may have heard of it. It started at Google, I believe, but it's pretty widespread at this point. And it kind of like has a few of these metrics around how quickly you can get your change to production, how reliable are those changes, and what kind of like your rate of deployment. So it has a few metrics that encompass not only like your productivity, but also like how reliable it is. And we found it useful. The one, I guess one caveat there is even with a framework that's supposedly industry kind of like known, there's still a lot of nuances, right? You have to, for example, when we say measuring your lead time to change, what does that mean? Is it your time to PR, or is it your time to like going to the beta user? So define what makes sense for your org, and then measure that, but stay consistent. So that'll be my answer on the measuring side. About how you sell DevX to leadership. Even at our size, at Airbnb, we have, I guess, 100 engineers plus team focused on DevX. We still have to justify like how those engineers are spending time. And what I found very helpful to do that is tie into the company priorities, right? As a DevX team, are you focused on just cranking out the next 5% build time improvement? Or are you helping, for example, launch this headliner? And are you, developing a framework that will facilitate that? I found that it's very helpful to be able to conceptualize this thing in terms of like what the business is trying to ship, at least talking to like C-suite executives, than pure dev productivity metrics. So that's my answer.
Yeah, and I think Lauren, I think you said right, like making your engineering org observable. That's normally a pretty easy sell to executives who don't necessarily have that understanding out the box. I think that's like a big one. But I actually normally think about this problem less about like selling the function, and actually a continual discussion around one very simple question to your engineering leadership, and that's what keeps you up at night. And that the answer to that will change over time based on the business, which actually, like to what Cherif was saying, helps you as a DevX team to sort of orient around like where the business is today. But I mean, like I remember when I joined Amplitude, I was like, what's keeping everyone up at night? And they were like, we haven't won this market yet. We've got to be able to ship new services and features quickly. Like that's it. Like, because we're still in that hunt. Like there's a massive time ahead of us. So like that's huge. But it's like, I think that continual discussion it shouldn't really be about selling. It should be about like, hey, we need to solve. There's a pain here, and you might not be articulating it into your team. So let me help you do that. Like, so you can become this like bi-directional thing. I'll show you what's happening in the org. You can tell me what we need to change, and we'll figure that out together. And that's how I think about it.
Awesome.
I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
Does anyone have a good answer for how you measure developer joy yet?
Developer tool.
Joy.
The joy. Like
Yes,
developer
the happiness factor. Like we do not have one yet.
Yeah.
I'm seeking that.
Yeah, I think it's like very qualitative as well as opposed to quantitative, right? I think like you mentioned surveys, for instance. Mm-hmm. That's probably like one way some people have been successful at it.
Yeah, we use GetDX to drive that survey question through the whole org, and that's super useful, but it's a complicated question.
I mean, like, what percentage of people do respond on that? Like, do you get like good?
Yeah, we've had good luck. We've had like 90s, like 95% of people typically.
Okay.
Like,
that's great.
Same. I guess we use surveys in addition to CSAT and just like Dora. But I think one framework that I've been very interested in recently is the space framework, which is, I think, what GetDX is built around. So it tries to take approaches beyond just like the typical like raw metrics, but things like happiness, right? And I don't think it's perfect, but it's the most interesting thing I've seen in this space recently.
That's right. Okay, I know we are close to time, so I'm going to do a rapid fire last question. Everyone, well, maybe I'll just call out names. What's your favorite tool that you use today related to developer experience? Sourcegraph? Okay. Anything you want to share about it?
For me, it's workspaces, like remote IDs. That's such a multiplier, I think, for engineers that it's really helpful. So yeah, workspaces.
Workspaces?
Basically, I think GitHub has a version called like
Code spaces.
Code spaces.
code spaces. There you go. But
Workspaces is the IntelliJ one. JetBrains.
Yeah. We have our own internally grown one, but I think it's the same idea, right? Like as a developer, you can get in, out quickly, and yeah.
Sweet. Lauren?
I do really like Sourcegraph, but my absolute favorite is the ones we have built to solve very specific problems at Reddit that we could not find a good solution to, that we decided to build ourselves that do exactly and only what we asked it to do. And those have been a joy.
Can you give an example of that? I'm curious.
So we have one called /hub, which we've talked about at a few other conferences, but it basically allows a very intelligent, it's kind of like GitHub Actions in terms of retries and things like that. So it only retries exactly what failed on a build. It helps with cherry picks. They're just things that we needed to do a little bit easier that we noticed our engineers consistently struggling with. Yeah.
That's a
Awesome.
good one.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Lauren, Cherif, and Adam, for this amazing conversation. Thank you, everyone, for joining. And we are, again, we are Aviator. We also have a booth down there on the ground floor if you want to check out and learn more about like how we can help your team improve developer experience. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your evening.